Grace Slick spent years as one of the biggest names in rock music. Millions knew her powerful voice. Thousands packed arenas just to see her perform. But today, at 86 years old, the woman who once stood at the center of a cultural revolution has shared an emotional update that has reminded fans why they never forgot her. It is not about another comeback or a surprise concert. Instead, it is a heartfelt reflection on life, aging, and knowing when to leave the spotlight behind. And the real story behind that decision is even more remarkable than most people realize. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. If you had reached the very top of your career, would you have walked away while everyone still wanted more? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because Grace Slick made a choice that still surprises people today. For many fans, Grace Slick will always be remembered as the fearless voice behind some of the most unforgettable songs of the 1960s. As the lead singer of Jefferson Airplane, she became one of the few women to stand at the front of one of the world's biggest rock bands. Her powerful performances on songs like Somebody to Love and White Rabbit helped define an entire generation. According to interviews she has given over the years, she never wanted to fit into anyone else's idea of what a female singer should be. She wanted to be bold, honest, and completely herself. But behind the fame was a woman who often challenged expectations. Grace was known for speaking her mind, whether people agreed with her or not. That fearless attitude made her a music icon, but it also brought criticism and controversy. While fans admired her confidence, very few understood the personal cost of living under constant public attention. Years later, instead of chasing another tour or trying to relive her greatest successes, Grace made a decision that shocked many people. She stepped away from performing and focused on living life on her own terms. In interviews with respected outlets such as Rolling Stone and the New York Times, as well as in her memoir, she has explained that she wanted people to remember her at her best rather than watch her struggle to keep up with time. It was an unusual choice in an industry where many artists never stop performing. At first, some people questioned that decision. But as the years passed, fans began to understand there was something deeply honest about it. Grace believed every chapter has its ending, and she refused to let fame decide when hers should close. What happened next would show that walking away was not the end of her story. In many ways, it was the beginning of a completely different life, one that few fans ever got to see. When Grace Slick was born in 1939, nobody could have guessed she would become one of the most unforgettable voices in rock history. She spent her early years moving from place to place because of her father's work. Life was never centered on music. Like many young people of her time, she simply searched for where she truly belonged. But that search would soon lead her into one of the biggest cultural movements America had ever seen. In the early 1960s, Grace worked as a model for a short time. It looked like a promising career, but something was missing. Then she watched the rising rock bands around San Francisco and realized music gave people a freedom she had never experienced before. Inspired by the growing local music scene, she joined a band called the Great Society. That single decision changed the direction of her life forever. But this was only the beginning. Not long afterward, Jefferson Airplane needed a new singer. Grace joined the group in 1966, replacing their original female vocalist. Almost overnight, everything changed. She did not simply become another member of the band. She became its strongest voice and one of its most unforgettable faces. Her powerful vocals on Somebody to Love and the dreamlike White Rabbit helped push Jefferson Airplane to international fame. Music historians, biographies, and documentaries about the band often point to those songs as defining moments of the psychedelic rock era. Grace's voice sounded fearless, confident, and unlike anything audiences had heard before. As the band's popularity exploded, so did the pressure. Concerts became larger. Tours became longer. Reporters followed every move the band made. The late 1960s were filled with political protests, social change, and endless media attention. Jefferson Airplane found themselves at the center of it all. Every performance carried enormous expectations. Fans expected unforgettable shows. Record companies expected hit songs. The media expected controversy. Grace rarely disappointed them. She spoke openly about politics, challenged authority, and refused to soften her personality just to please critics. Some admired her honesty. Others believed she went too far. Either way, people could not stop talking about her. And then came one of the most legendary moments of her career. Jefferson Airplane performed at historic events like the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967 and Woodstock in 1969. Those performances turned Grace into a symbol of an entire generation. Millions who had never seen the band before suddenly knew exactly who she was. Her voice became part of music history. Yet behind the applause, another story was quietly unfolding. The non-stop touring, constant attention, and pressure of being a rock icon slowly began taking a toll. Friends and fellow musicians later described the music world of that era as exciting but also exhausting. Grace herself would later speak honestly in interviews and in her memoir about struggles with alcohol and the darker side of fame. The excitement that looked magical from the outside often felt overwhelming behind closed doors. Just when it seemed she had reached the highest point of her career, the cracks were beginning to show. Few fans realized that the biggest challenge of her life was not becoming famous. It was surviving everything that came with it. Before we reveal the turning point that nearly changed everything, make sure you subscribe, because the next part uncovers the hidden battles and difficult choices that most people never knew about. The world saw Grace Slick as fearless. On stage, she looked untouchable. She sang in front of huge crowds, spoke her mind without fear, and became one of the strongest female voices in rock history. But away from the lights, life was becoming much harder than anyone imagined. As the 1970s moved forward, the pressure of constant touring, recording, and living in the public eye began to wear her down. Grace later admitted in interviews and in her autobiography that alcohol had become a serious problem. What started as part of the rock and roll lifestyle slowly became something much more difficult to control. But things were about to get even worse. One of the most talked about moments came in 1978 during a concert in Germany. After drinking heavily before going on stage, Grace struggled through the performance. Fans were shocked, and the show became one of the lowest points of her career. Instead of hiding from what happened, she later spoke openly about it, accepting responsibility for her actions. That honesty earned respect, even from people who had criticized her. Her personal life also brought heartbreak. Relationships ended. Band members came and went. Jefferson Airplane changed into Jefferson Starship and later Starship as the music industry itself continued to evolve. The sound that had once defined a generation was changing, and Grace found herself asking a difficult question. How long should anyone stay in the spotlight? Many artists keep performing for as long as they can. Grace chose a different path. By the late 1980s, she announced that she was retiring from touring and recording new rock music. She explained that she did not want people to watch her grow old on stage simply because they remembered her younger years. In interviews with outlets including Rolling Stone and the New York Times, she said rock music belongs to youth and energy, and she wanted fans to remember her at her strongest rather than see her trying to recreate the past. It was a decision that surprised many people. Some thought she would eventually return. She never really did. Instead, Grace discovered another passion: painting. She built a successful career as an artist, creating colorful portraits and images inspired by music, animals, and imagination. Her artwork found collectors around the world, proving that creativity does not disappear when one chapter ends. Simply finds a new home. Many people watching right now may feel like one part of their life has come to an end. Maybe it's a career, a dream, or a relationship. Grace Slick's story reminds us that closing one chapter doesn't mean your story is over. Sometimes the next chapter becomes the one that brings the most peace. Then, at 86, Grace shared a heartfelt update that reflected the same honesty she had shown throughout her life. She spoke about aging with acceptance instead of fear, expressing gratitude for the life she has lived and making it clear that she has no desire to chase the spotlight again. Rather than looking back with regret, she has encouraged people to enjoy the present and let each stage of life have its own meaning. But her final message and the legacy she leaves behind is perhaps the most powerful part of her story. Grace Slick's greatest legacy is not just the music she created. It is the courage she showed by knowing when to let go. While many artists spend years trying to relive their biggest moments, Grace chose a different ending. She walked away on her own terms, built a new life as a respected painter, and proved that success is not only about staying famous. Sometimes, true success is knowing when a chapter has reached its natural end. Now, at 86, her recent reflections have touched fans because they carry the same honesty that defined her entire career. In interviews over the years, Grace has spoken openly about growing older, saying she has no interest in returning to the exhausting life of touring. Instead, she has embraced a quieter life focused on painting, family, and enjoying each day. Her message is simple but powerful. Every stage of life has value, and there is no shame in growing older with grace. That message means even more when you remember everything she survived. She lived through the wildest years of rock music. She experienced incredible fame, personal struggles, public criticism, and moments when everything could have fallen apart. Yet she refused to let those difficult chapters define her. Instead of pretending she had lived a perfect life, she admitted her mistakes and learned from them. That honesty is one reason so many fans still admire her today. Looking back, Grace Slick helped change the role of women in rock music. At a time when female performers were often expected to fit into narrow expectations, she refused to follow the rules. She stood on stage with confidence, wrote songs that challenged listeners, and proved that talent and authenticity mattered more than fitting into someone else's image. Countless female artists who followed have recognized her influence on rock music. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Life is not about staying young forever. It is not about holding on to fame at any cost. It is about knowing who you are, accepting change, and finding happiness beyond the applause. Grace Slick's journey reminds us that every ending can become the beginning of something beautiful if we have the courage to embrace it. As fans continue listening to White Rabbit and Somebody to Love, they are not just hearing classic songs. They are hearing the voice of someone who lived boldly, accepted her flaws, and chose peace over endless attention. That is a legacy few people ever achieve. But Grace Slick's story is only one of many incredible journeys hidden behind the biggest names in music. In our next documentary, we'll uncover another legendary artist whose public image hid a secret life that almost no one knew about. You won't want to miss it.